I'm Nato Thompson, Chief Curator at Creative Time. There's a lot of complexities that comes with doing stuff in the public sphere. We've done it a lot, so we just have kind of a lot of background in terms of doing this work that sometimes artists haven't thought of. And also, a lot of artists don't have the opportunity to do public work on the scale that we offer. So we kind of act as a kind of like sounding board for things they may want to consider. You know, I'd say every artist is different, but you know, we really try to just listen to what they want to say, and more, as opposed to guiding the process, that's not the thing. We really just say, have you thought of this? Have you thought of this? These are some reactions you might get to this. So, you know, if it's the Bruce High Quality Foundation going on the road, we'd say, hey, you know, one of the things we experience, which is like, I'm like, hey, sometimes when you go out across the country as an art group from New York, people aren't always happy to see artists from New York. There's a chip on your shoulder about artists from New York. So have you thought about that? You know, we just act as this. Or like, hey, you know, right now you're doing art and pedagogy. Well, there's like this whole universe of pedagogical experiments happening. How do you place yourself within this? So there's that kind of thing. So there's both theoretical and then there's pragmatic too, which is just like, bare bones, like, yeah, I know you want to do that, but you'll never get the permits for that. Or at least being a sounding board for things that are impossible, so we can focus on things that are possible. But at the end of the day, we want to say yes more than no, and I think that's one of the kind of big things, is just always say yes at first, and then try to think through how to say no. We're working on the show right now called Living as Form, and it's looking at artists that do social-based, collectivized work to produce changes in the world. This seems pretty abstract, but it's useful to be very abstract and not to label things in art terms sometimes, to just be like, how does it actually manifest? Some artists, particularly some that we're really invested in, are doing work that really reflects similar models you'd see in the nonprofit NGO world, right? And I think some of the kind of critical tendencies in the art world, which is so funny, because I find the art world extraordinarily paranoid that somehow you're going to destroy this thing called art, like it's this vulnerable, fragile thing that you shouldn't poke at a lot. But they're like, how is that art? What is it art? Who is the... I'm not worried about that just yet. You know, the real question, and I think the artists aren't either, the real question, I think, is, what is this trying to do? You know, what is this historical condition we're in? Where so many efforts are reflected across a wide range of disciplines. And you see this with a lot of artists, where now you know, it's funny because the general American mind's still stuck in ABEX somewhere along the way, but like artistic practice has grown so much that now like everyone's really comfortable with the artist being their own press person, and that being part of the work. Their own publicist, their own community organizer. They do workshops, they do pedagogy, there's multiple levels of audience. There's a web page, there's the international audience, there's a local audience, there's the friends. This kind of complexity defies easy understandings of what the work is, because it is lots of things to different people, and there's different levels to it. This kind of complexity, I think, is the moment we're in. The question after that, which I think is really interesting, right? And it's not really like, what I'm interested in, and I think a lot of the artists in, is like, what do we do? Because like with Tanya's project, just to back up, with Immigrant Movement International, she's basically following a logic, like, how do I make real political change in the world? This is the question, right? How do I make an art that is useful? She has so many phenomenal phrases like, I don't want an art that points at a thing, I want an art that is the thing. This kind of anti-representational methodologies. Or she also says, it's time to take Duchamp's urinal and put it back in the restroom. Well, this idea of returning the ready-made to the world, Duchamp's coat rack back into the coat rack, get it out of the museum and put it back as a functional tool in the house. But now it's an art object in the house. What do we do with all that? How does it reflect already existing structures in the world? This I don't know the answer to. And we're not here to solve all questions, right? I am interested in looking at some of the most ingenious people who are thinking through these and following it to its nth degree. You know, those questions will be posed as we go along, but I don't want to I think that's a very conservative tendency to try to rein stuff in before it's followed its logic. I'm a big believer that, you know, we've turned a very historic corner in that. This idea, when Boyce said every person is an artist, every person kind of is an artist at this point. You look at YouTube, you look at design, an everyday person has already intuitively understood symbolic production as a way of being in the world. This isn't just art, it's this idea of like this person with paint all over their pants, like stuck in their studio. This is such an antiquated notion. People as culture producers, the way we would live in the world, Smart artists get this, and their interest is in how do we think through the world now that everyone has an already intuitive sense of symbolic production. I guess that is to go to the point of like, where do we go from here? I don't know the answer, but I'm so interested in the problems and pushing it as far as it can go. And at the same time too, like historically, forget what artists have done, but great minds and great people have always wanted to be relevant in the world we're in. And they're very frustrated with this kind of irrelevance or this kind of bullshitting that comes with a lot of art that says one thing but doesn't really accomplish it. And I think those frustrations force these kind of methodologies that resist easy categorization, and we're inspired by that and try to kind of support it. There's a suspicion, and I think it's totally well merited, that artists are just doing this for this kind of career status thing, right? They said they helped these people, and it makes everyone nauseous because you know that you're just doing it so you can be some hot artist in some biennial circuit and you have no investment. Certainly that's kind of an example of what I think is like a worst case scenario in someone's mind, or this exploitative cultural capital relationship. But what really needs to get teased out is how one would even think through what results are. How would you know when something pedagogically occurred? How would you know when someone's life was transformed? By what kind of metrics of assessment is one able to see results? We don't even know what we're talking about. We're just going on gut instinct. Because it's entirely possible, although I try to go with my own gut. What else we got? I try to go with people that are earnest, to try to make an actual commitment. But there's certainly, like, at the end of the day, there's part of me that thinks at times, even then, even with that, certainly there will be moments where some results might come back and they're like, that artist that was totally like just went in and did this cheap project and went out, that totally changed people's lives. And it was amazing. You just don't know, Like this artist Rick Lowe, who did Project Row Houses in the 3rd Ward of Houston, who's, people bring him up as an example of like total accountability, which he is. Spent 15 years in a broke neighborhood in Houston to try to develop this kind of urban housing model. And even he's so funny because it's like, everyone's like, you should be a little more like Rick Lowe. And I'm like, are you asking every person to take on 15-year projects? What if it's a bad idea? Now you gotta do it for 15 years. But he says, there's a lot of critique of people parachuting in, parachuting out. Well, certainly sometimes that's awful. But sometimes that works out fine, It's really like case by case. So I guess to problematize the narrative, it's like, we certainly try desperately to counteract the kind of carpetbagger, social capital, symbolic production, mercenary attitudes out there in the world. This is a kind of the job. Nonetheless, I also want to be quite humble in the capacity to do so. When we worked on Paul Chan's Waiting for Godot in New Orleans, we did community meetings and we were really trying to say like, okay, you guys went through Katrina, this area's totally been through so much trauma, historically, not even just after Katrina, but how do we operate ethically so we don't do this kind of spectacle carpetbagging? That was an effort on our part and Paul Chan to ground a kind of symbolic act in social relations. And we do that with our work projects. Part of me is totally like, understand that's the right way to go. I just don't want to pretend that that solves everything at the same time. You could do all that work and still be somehow complicit. One of the challenges that we come up against too is like, I always worry that when you die, like on my tombstone it'll say like, but is it art? Right? And I'll be like, oh my gosh, this question never goes away. I keep trying to kill it and then it comes back and then I try to kill it and it's like a zombie. But one of the things that's expanding, and when we say expanded, it's not just global, which comes with its own, globalism in general, this idea that like art is something that makes sense in every context everywhere is already like completely problematic. So even the context of a global art world has already made the kind of critical capacities totally like struggling to keep pace with the kind of realities of cultural production around the world. But then also working interdisciplinary too, so dealing with like human rights organizations and theater and performing art. Even just the difference between performing arts and visual arts, that little disparity of language and aesthetic expectations is already such a mess. So I guess that's, one of the struggles is just a language issue, which is just trying to get people to see themselves in a similar kind of light. And also, that comes with the different things too, funding, getting funders to understand that difference, that you're, at the same time there's other people that are along for the ride. and our audiences to get their head around, like, okay, we're going to try to push this towards like a bigger kind of community. Globally too, working globally is really difficult, and we've not cracked the code on that, because we really, you know, just in really basic brass tacks ways, you need to do total investment in an area, you need to be there. And the thing I hate the most is spending a whole budget on plane flights and hotels. I always like the money to go to the project more specifically. So we've been really trying to think through how to like do something where the majority of the cash and support goes right to the project itself. And trying to also counteract any kind of typical New York, US-based colonialist kind of ways of working, where you're going to tell people how they should live better or give them advice or some kind of irritating kind of thing like that. But that typically is solved by working with artists that we feel like are ethical and responsible and aware of these kind of complex geopolitical issues. So, you know, working with the right artists is one way to go, and the other one is just thinking practically about how to support it as best we can.